Hello and welcome to Chapter 7. In this chapter, we're going to be discussing performance appraisal, how to go about that process. Excuse me while I touch something really quickly here. Okay. So, our learning objectives for this chapter include being able to create a performance appraisal instrument, administering a performance appraisal system, describing the problems associated with performance ratings, conducting a performance appraisal review, which we will not really be doing, but you'll know how to do that, explain how to legally terminate an unproductive employee, and determine the legality of a performance appraisal system. Okay, so just kind of overview of performance appraisal. When we say performance appraisal, we're referring to a systematic review and evaluation of job performance. Okay, so there's some key phrases there. Systematic review. So systematic means that you are following a prescribed protocol for reviewing relevant information that would allow you to conduct an evaluation of a person's job performance. The outcome of that will be performance feedback. So we are going to be providing performance feedback to that individual who has been systematically reviewed and evaluated. So it's really this two-step process. We're going to be very systematic and very consistent across employees, and we're going to be very careful in providing useful performance feedback that can allow the employee to grow and develop and meet goals. I found this joke card that says, "I'm so excited for my annual performance review today." Said no one ever. No one enjoys performance reviews. Nobody likes to be reviewed. No one likes to hear even the slightest amount of negativity. I'm the worst, so I absolutely am not pointing fingers when I say no one, me in particular, do not like to hear negative information at all. And so when we do good performance reviews, it's productive. It's something that doesn't make the person who is receiving the performance review feel defensive. It's something that helps them to grow. It's an important thing in any organization to give feedback to employees about how they're performing. So what is the purpose of doing this? It's not to torture us. We use performance appraisals when we're making personnel decisions, deciding who's going to get promoted, fired, or demoted. Those are important decisions, and so we want to make sure that we have really good data. Decisions about raises. Who deserves a raise? Who deserves to stay status quo? That's an important decision, and so using something systematic like performance appraisal will be really helpful. Developmental purposes. Helping an employee to recognize their own personal strengths, their own personal weaknesses, that then will allow that employee to advance their own careers. They can advance ideally within the organization, but they can build on their strengths, compensate for their weaknesses, and become the best person that they can be. Documentation of organizational decisions. This is where the legalities come into play, because we want to keep track of employee performance over time and legitimate track, not like a few chapters ago when I said how sometimes when an organization wants to, sort of remove an older employee because they cost too much, they might start years in advance with sort of lowering just like a little incrementally the performance evaluation of the person who's now over 40, so that they could point to it and say, well, look, your performance has been declining over these past years. That's not the purpose of performance appraisal. The purpose of performance appraisal is to keep track of those employees who are growing, those employees who have stagnated, those who maybe have started slacking off. It gives us a detailed account because we went systematically through all the relevant records to develop our appraisal. It gives us a detailed account of any kind of inadequate performance, and we can point to specific cases or specific issues. I was just watching a case yesterday where they were discussing an employee who believed that they were wrongfully terminated. And the employer brought to court, the employee said, yes, I was sometimes late. The employer said, I fired you because you were chronically late. The employee said, I was only sometimes late. And the employer brought the records that showed over the past 90 days that the employee had been late 13 times. So the employee was a little shocked to see those numbers also, but couldn't contest them because they were like, oh, yeah, I'd forgotten. When it's you doing it, a lot of times you forget. But if a person is keeping good records and we can point to those records, it gives us the justification. And you'll notice I said I was watching a case because the person was saying they were wrongfully terminated. And so they were suing their employer, and they ended up not winning because the employer had the documentation that showed that this was a chronic and really inappropriate. Honestly, out of 90 days, which is a calendar month, how many of those days are actually work days, right? So you got to take 2 out of every week. And so we'll say 8 days out of every 30. So 22 times, so 66 days you were late 13 times. That's a lot of lateness. And so keeping track of those kinds of things and giving the person feedback. In fact, this terminated employee had been on probation, had been told, if you're late one more time, we're firing you. But the employee didn't think it counted because they were late because there was an accident on the freeway. They were 2 hours late. Anyhow, this kind of keeping track of things can protect an employer in the long run against wrongful termination cases when it isn't wrongful. Sometimes termination is wrongful, but in those cases when it's not, performance evaluation can be really helpful. So some of the implications of performance appraisal. If we don't have carefully developed and carefully implemented performance appraisal processes, there can be negative repercussions. We can have the wrong person getting promoted, or the wrong person getting transferred, or the wrong person being fired. These are big decisions that could have really long-term repercussions for the organization. Inequitable feelings. If good employees receive smaller rewards than bad employees, it's going to be demoralizing for everyone. So we want to make sure that people who are performing well are being recognized. People who are performing status quo are being told, maybe you could grow and develop. People who are sincerely not doing well maybe need to be replaced. I put that nicely. But we don't want people to start feeling inequitable or else they get resentful. Legal suits, lawsuits oftentimes come from weak systems. Employees can, basically what you end up with is the employee saying, nah, I never did that. And the employer saying, yeah, you did. And if it's both of you just sort of accusing each other, the tide tends to go to the employee. And so the employer needs to have good data. Otherwise, they're at risk of being, forced to rehire someone or pay them their back wages or other kinds of things based on having a poor appraisal system. Finally, disgruntled employees. If you have an employee who feels like nothing that they do results in good outcomes, they may start to decrease their effort. There has been a lot of talk since the pandemic about people, what are they calling it? A quiet resignation or something, where they continue to come to work, do the bare minimums and not really quit, but they've basically quit. That's a person who's feeling very resentful towards their employer. So why are they feeling resentful? Maybe because they feel like even if I work harder, I don't get any benefit from that. I see people doing less than me and they're getting more than I am. So they can become disgruntled. They may ignore feedback because they may not trust the source. If they feel like this isn't a systematic performance appraisal, but maybe a biased one, they may ignore the feedback. They may decide to quit after all the years and all the time that they've put into the organization, all the energy that the organization has put into the employee to develop them. They may quit because they're so disgruntled about what's going on. And so these are negative repercussions about having bad performance appraisal processes. We want to have good ones. So effective and legal performance appraisal systems will be job related, ideally having been developed from job analysis. I worked it in the first video of the chapter. Job analysis gives us good job related things to evaluate people on. So job analysis, they are properly administered. They need to be done in a formal way. They need to be standardized so that everybody in the same kind of job within the organization gets the same judgments, the same data goes into it, that like everything's as identical as can be. Now, it's not perfect. Individuals have individual relationships with the organization, stuff like that. But basically, you want to make sure that to the greatest extent possible, everybody's being treated the same way. And then the other thing about proper administration is that you want to have a performance appraisal system that is not too complicated. If it's too complicated, no one's doing it. No one's going to implement it correctly if it takes too much effort, too much time, too much cognitive attention. People just are not going to complete it the way it's designed to be completed. So it needs to be, doable. It needs to provide specific feedback. You want to always focus on the behaviors rather than imply that it's a trait. So, for example, let's see, I'll do something positive. So instead of saying something like, wow, you are such a friendly and outgoing person, those are traits. Those are, in fact, maybe not things that the person can even help that they do. Like that's just how they are. Instead, you focus on behaviors. I notice that you tend to smile at every customer when they enter the store. Or, you always give really personalized feedback to the clients when they're here. Those kinds of very specific behavioral based and feedbacks are much more helpful than you're so nice. That's kind of vague anyway. You are so helpful. That makes it feel like it's not something that they could build on. It just seems like something that they are. When you say you are this, instead, if you say, I saw you helping those customers, right? Like that's helpful. The other thing about specific feedback is that the ratings are documented. So you don't say out loud, I gave you a 5 on everything and not ever show any kind of documentation or evidence that that's what you gave them, right? You want to make sure that they're documented because now it's become like data, something that other people could look at, other people could review. And so we want to make sure that these are formal pieces of paper or formal digital records that are kept in like that employee's file. We want to use appropriate raters. First off, no matter who it is, they need to be trained. Everybody needs to be trained in how to administer a performance appraisal system. So trained, everybody who has the insight or knowledge of this person's work behavior should be given an opportunity to provide ratings. So that could be supervisors, it could be coworkers, it could be clients or subordinates or anybody who might know this person's work behavior well enough should be included in the rating system. So all relevant raters should be used. And then sort of the inverse is everybody who is used as a rater should be relevant. So don't throw people in who really don't know. Sometimes I'm asked to do letters of recommendation for students who I've had in one online class and that's it. And I don't know anything else about them. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup if I had to. And they say, can you write me a letter of recommendation? And it's like, well, I can say that you did well in my class, but I mean, is that really as helpful as it could be? Am I really a relevant rater? I know one thing, you turn stuff in on time. Like that's all I can say. I guess that you completed everything I asked. I don't know if that's the most helpful ratings. I don't think I'm a relevant rater. I'm not really qualified to do that rating. Yes, I am your professor, but am I qualified to rate you? I don't think so. So it's hard for me, but sometimes I have to tell purely online students, I mean, you need to find somebody who knows you better, right? And that's what we're getting at, is that you need somebody who is relevant and qualified to do the ratings. All right, well, that feels like a good place to stop because now we've talked about who should be doing it. Let's turn our attention in the next video to how they should be doing it. So I will see you in the next video.